Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the From Adversity to Abundance podcast. I am your host, Jamie Bateman, and today I'm thrilled to have on with us a special guest, James Webb. James, how are you doing today?
Doing great, brother. How are you?
I'm doing well. We were chatting just before this, and man, it's you've got a wild story that we're going to only be able to unpack only so much, but I'm really thrilled to find out to get to know you better over this next hour, and I'm hoping we can bring some value. I know we'll bring some value to our listeners. So for our listeners out there, who are you, and what are you up to today?
Oh, well, my name is James Webb. I'm a somewhat serial entrepreneur, I guess is how I describe myself. And currently living half the year in Frisco, Texas, half the year in Mexico. Just did 3 startup companies over the last year. So having fun with those. And
Nice.
just really blessed and lucky and living the dream.
Yeah, it's you rattled off a bunch of and we're going to get to it, but the businesses you've started and sold, and it's perfect for our audience, which is primarily entrepreneurs and real estate investors. So I know you can speak to that audience very well. Now, let's dive right in. You mentioned several different things that we could focus on, but let's dive right into your backstory and kind of drill down on some of the adversity that you've faced. And if you would just kind of walk us through most of your history, if you would.
Yeah, I'll kind of start from the beginning. It's kind of cute and fun.
Yeah.
Young man born to 2 17-year-old high school students, got a little too friendly too early. Somewhat homeless. We lived in a shack behind the little electrical shop that my dad was an apprentice at, and grew up in the deep South, Mississippi. When I was 17 years old, went to the local junior college and saw a sign one day that said, "You want to be an X-ray tech? Call this number." And so I did. And 2 years later, after 2 years of slave labor at the hospital, I became an X-ray technician. Got married very young at 19, and continued my working at nights in the emergency room while I got my bachelor's degree in the daytime. And then, as I shared with you earlier, on a flip of a coin, decided Atlanta or Dallas, and off we went at 22 years of age to Dallas, Texas, and slept in the mall parking lot till I could figure out what the heck I just done.
Now, why those two? How did you decide on those two cities?
It was not hard. It was the 2 big cities on both sides of Laurel, Mississippi.
Got
So
it.
I thought the business opportunities or the career opportunities would be for me.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. So the coin flip decided Dallas for you, and so you went to Dallas, and what happened after the
Yeah,
move to
we
Dallas?
loaded up a pickup truck and a bass boat and headed to Dallas. And then took me about 6 months to settle in. I'd had jobs in X-ray tech for a while, but then I got a surprise offer to be director of radiology at one of the hospitals in Dallas. At that point, 23 years of age, the youngest in the U.S. And this is way before the internet, so I went to school 4 nights a week while I worked 8 to 5 in the daytime and got my master's degree. Thought I was going to be a hospital administrator, had a potential offer, and then this thing called MRI came out. And was approached by a gentleman about joining them to start one of the first MRI companies in the U.S. And I said no at first, but after an interview in Connecticut in 130 miles an hour in a Datsun 240Z, I finally said yes.
Nice.
And thus started my non-clinical medical career.
Okay. So now growing up, did you have, I guess you had interest in the medical field in general?
Not really, no, to tell you the truth. Where you come from, you're supposed to be married by the time you're 19. I had a little girlfriend, and I knew that was just a career path that I'd seen somebody go through. I actually went to college on a music scholarship.
Okay.
So it was not in my genes to be a medical person per se.
Okay.
And then the funny side story is the day I had my interview for the X-ray tech job, she dumped me. So I just continued forward and did the 2-year program.
Okay. So now, okay. So you mentioned you initially turned down the job offer, and then you took it, and then what happened from there?
Yeah, this is in the very early stages where we're putting these 24,000-pound MRI machines, or magnets as we call them, inside trailers and rotating between hospitals. And so when I joined the company, we had 3 routes at that time. 2.5 years later, we had 53 routes
Hmm.
around the country. We were the second biggest. I was close to 30 years old by then. Uh, Sitting in a big office space in downtown Dallas. I was vice president, had about 300 employees, and I thought I was hot, you know what. And then got one of the big surprises of my life when the phone rang and it said, "Mr. Webb, the chair you're sitting in needs to be vacant. We just sold the company, and since you have no equity, you're fired."
Wow. And that wasn't even a face-to-face conversation.
Straight over
It's,
the phone.
wow. Okay, so you're 30 years
Completely
old. You
by
get
surprise, yeah.
so there was no inkling of the company not doing well. It sounds like it was on a growth path. And then so if anything, you're thinking you're riding the wave and everything's great, right?
Oh yeah, making more money than I ever made in my life with a salary, and it
Mhm.
taught me one quick lesson that I realized I was just paid slave labor.
Hmm.
I call it a hired gun. And the cute part of the story is I left my office and cleaned it out, went home, played golf the next day. And since I was kind of known in the industry, it was a young industry. I had a job by Monday
Hmm.
in Atlanta, Georgia. So I moved from Dallas, Texas to Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
A lesser of
Okay.
a role than I had, but a bigger company.
So you
And
did get to do hit both cities,
I
both
did.
sides of the coin, if you will.
I got both
Um,
of them.
okay. So then, and how long were you in Atlanta for?
Yeah, Atlanta was a tough year. I didn't really like the company. Didn't really like the owner of the company. To be honest, my marriage was in shambles. So we all have personal stories.
Mm.
And so after 18 months, I got offered a job as president of a company in South Florida. And my wife and I filed for divorce. And I took off to Boca Raton, Florida, and she went back to Mississippi with her family. And I did the best I could. We had a daughter to see my daughter at least twice a month
Hmm.
and begin a job then in Boca Raton, Florida.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's quite a, I mean, just divorce is obviously a lot of adversity right there that unfortunately a lot of people can relate to. Um, and so, and then what happened once you moved to Boca Raton?
Yeah, Boca was great. Worked for a guy named Steve Schulman. Unfortunately, he just passed away 2 weeks ago, and I did his
Hmm.
funeral down in Boca. Went down there to be a part of it. Great mentor. They had a physician-owned company, and at that time, this thing called the START legislation had come out, which said doctors could not have ownership in places they sent patients to. So
Hmm.
my job was to revamp the entire company, and so we ultimately rolled it into a public shell and bought out all the doctor partners.
I
I
see.
had to convert it from sort of a physician-owned vehicle to now we had to survive in the regular market against hospitals and other imaging center companies
Hmm.
without partner physicians. And we did quite well. And I also met Marcia while I was in Florida, and we dated for about 3 years, and we're ultimately married about 1995, I think it was.
Okay.
And had a great
Um,
career going.
Now, so it sounds like you were starting to get involved on the into the kind of the business side of things, whether you'd planned on that or not. Um, and I know you went on to start a lot of different companies that were very successful. At that point, what's going through your mind with regard to, business versus career? What's happening with you personally with regard to kind of where you think you're headed with your career at that point?
Yeah, there's no question I wanted to be an entrepreneur. When you're president of a company that's decent size, you're making a nice living, getting good bonuses, living in South Florida. Yeah, sometimes you let things get by you. And I had a doctor approach me one day and said, "Hey, do you want to put a MRI system in Trinidad and Tobago?" And I thought, well, the company won't do that, but I will. And so I went to my chairman of the board and I said, "I need two things from you. I need you to fire me so I can exercise my severance package, and I need you to be my first investor." And he said, "Okay." So he fired me and wrote a check to be my first investor.
Well, I imagine you must have had a good relationship with him already established then.
Yeah, he's a great
Um,
guy.
so okay, so then and then what happened? Kind
Yeah.
of.
Packed up, headed down to Trinidad, met with the Minister of Health, tried to figure out the market, worked with this doctor, found a couple of really cool key employees. One, of all places, a master's degree in magnetic resonance physics from Canada, and he happened to live in Trinidad, and I made him the
Wow.
boss. And then the runner-up to Miss Trinidad and Tobago became my marketing rep, and
Okay.
had a 24,000 pound machine and a double wide trailer shipped from Miami, Florida, on a boat and a barge all the way to Trinidad and Tobago. Set up operations and said, okay, this is good. We also did a heart catheterization lab there. And then further leads led to Nicaragua. We put up a site. San Jose, I'm sorry, in Honduras was the second one or third one. The Bahamas, one back in Miami. So just kind of bouncing around, opening these centers, hiring staff. Really early days of remote working, but I was remote working.
Okay. Pre-COVID.
Oh, yeah.
So now we're what's your thought though when you're starting this? Is it just one step at a time kind of thing? What's your mindset? Are you thinking I'm going to blow this up and make it huge, or this is just I don't want to have a salary anymore. I want to try something else. What's going through your mind?
Yeah, I think it's really kind of the combination of those things. I didn't really think big picture yet. I learned that a little bit later in my career.
Okay.
I was really focused on a few projects, trying to make income. I also wanted to make sure I paid my investors back and had a return for them.
Hmm.
And I think it was really the crazy story was Nicaragua. I went to Managua, Nicaragua 53 times over a 3-year period.
Wow.
One, building the site, and two, trying to save it, because I learned a lot about healthcare in some of these smaller countries. It's not like here where you got Medicare, you've got Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Hmm.
There, most of the money was paid by the patients directly. I learned
Mm-hmm.
that doctors were not just doctors, they were also kind of their bankers.
Mm.
So were they going to let a patient go spend $500 on an MRI scan, or were they going to let a patient spend $500 on them? So a lot
Right.
of that I had to learn about.
So
I tell
they didn't have the what do you call it, this start legislation.
They did not have the start legislation, and I
Yeah.
literally had a meeting with about 50 doctors in a room, presented the deal to them, and at the end of the day, I had one investor.
Wow.
They just didn't get the
Hmm.
concept, which is also good, because I worried that if they got it, they might have abused patients referrals, and
Mm.
so it was
Hmm.
okay. So we went independent, and my three quick stories about Nicaragua, which was always fun,
Hmm.
is on the 53rd trip, or the 50th trip, I decided to climb a volcano for fun. And there was a little bridge
Yeah.
built out over the lava, and I climbed out over it and looked up, and all of a sudden there was a Sandinista soldier with a gun pointed right at me. And I thought, okay, he's going to shoot me. I'm going to fall in the lava and they'll never find me. I'll be the DB Cooper of medical imaging. And then he
Right.
put his gun down and laughed. And I always say my resolve was shaken but not gone. And my next trip, I went back and asked my lawyer, who's the largest employer in the country? He said, oh, senor, that would be the Sandinistas. And I said, the Sandinistas, that's the Oliver North stuff. That doesn't really apply anymore. And he goes, no, they control the army and the police. And so I had to ask for a meeting with the head of the medical division of the Sandinista army, straight out of a Rambo movie.
Right.
45-minute trek into the jungle, beat on a rusty iron gate to get in. Next thing I know, I'm surrounded by guns, pushed up against the wall, gun in my
Wow.
rib, gun in my head, and all I can scream is Chamorro, which was the name of the general I was trying to meet with. Uh, Seemed like a lifetime. It was probably a minute. And
Right.
met with him. Nothing came out of that. And then on the last visit, there was a riot in the city between the police and the taxi cab drivers. And my bodyguard, and yes, sometimes out of bodyguard, handed me a sawed-off shotgun, shoved me in the back of a pickup truck, and we went right through the flames and the violence of the airport. And when I
Wow.
landed in Miami, I had a little, 1.5-year-old baby at home, and I just called my investors and said, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to sell the company.
So
And
at that point, I mean, those are just wild stories. That's
oh,
that we're unfortunately just have to gloss over. But that's crazy. So at this point, how much skin in the game do you have in the company?
yeah, I've got everything I had was in the company.
Okay,
I
so you've
literally was
gone
living
all in.
off a little paycheck from the company, and that was it. No money in the bank, really.
Gotcha. And then so you decide that I mean your your life is in danger at this point, and so it's just not worth it. And so you pull a 180 as far as the company goes.
Well, no, I actually had a buyer lined up.
Okay.
There was someone doing some international work. Now you're talking about, 15 to 20 years after MRI came out. So there were big companies out there.
Gotcha.
And I sold, shut down the Nicaraguan site, just shut it down. I sold the other sites to this company, probably pocketed $300,000 or $400,000 for myself. And that
How
gave
old
me
were
a
you
chance
at
to
this
kind
point?
of, I would have been 32, probably 35 or 36.
Okay.
Sounds about
Which,
right.
yeah, which, it was still decent money, but,
Yeah, it
uh,
gave me a chance to kind of regroup and rethink about what I wanted to do.
mhm. Okay. And so what did you determine you wanted to do then?
I wanted to start another company. And so I invested with two of my friends back in Texas in a single imaging center deal. And initially it was supposed to be mailbox money. Hey, I'll send you a check. You guys send me distributions. And
Hmm.
money just kept going that way and not coming this way. So
Yeah.
in
I,
2001, March of 2001, I packed up a 3-week-old baby, a 3-year-old son, and a supportive but somewhat disappointed wife, and moved to Plano, Texas, and kissed her on the cheek and said, I got to go back to work. I'll see you in 4 to 5 years. And work I did.
wow. So, okay. So you just buckled down and in that company that wasn't doing well at that point. Is that what you're saying?
We had one medical imaging clinic, so I
Okay.
became the manager of it.
Got it.
My buddy became the marketing rep for it, and my third buddy kind of handled the billing and collections.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I can, and I know a lot of entrepreneurs can relate as far as, starting a company, even if it's a small company, one imaging center, but, um, and then people, it's one thing I like to talk about on this show is the fact that entrepreneurship it's not a straight line to success, and especially starting a company can often be extremely challenging, as you know.
Mhm.
So at that point, you instead of throw more money at this thing, you decided to buckle down, roll up your sleeves, and work really hard. Is that what I'm hearing?
It is. I mean, I didn't take a salary, so I just had that money in the bank to live on.
Hmm.
Profit at that point was $150,000. I'd been shoving money toward Dallas for probably a year. I did some
Hmm.
consulting back in Florida before we left.
Hmm.
And we had all sorts of obstacles. Again, crazy stories. We
Hmm.
had an imaging center. Our first one was next to a hospital, connected to it, literally. I had bought the imaging center from them. That was our first project. We upgraded the machine to more modern technology. And then one day, in a single day, the hospital was shut down by the FBI. They accused the hospital administration of Medicare fraud.
Wow.
And we were given 10 days to vacate our property because our CO was tied to their CO.
Okay. So you weren't technically a part of their organization, but there was some, you were getting a lot of business from the hospital and there was some ownership crossover or something like that.
And no ownership
No
connection.
ownership. Okay.
We just leased the building from them, but we owned
Got it.
everything inside.
Got
And
it.
then
Okay.
they had a hospital and a medical office building. And when the hospital
Mhm.
shut down, our primary customer base was the doctors in the medical office building. Well, over a period of the next couple of months, they all vacated. So we were left
Wow.
with an imaging center next to a dead hospital. We had to
Got
figure out
it.
how to salvage it.
Okay. So walk us through kind of from that point. I know you've done a ton of things. um, Walk us through some of the ups and downs from that point through today, if you would.
Yeah, it was a tough ride in those days, and we'd already opened our second and about to open our third site when that happened. Another crazy story that happens to you as an entrepreneur. Our primary lender out of what's a company called DVI, they were a public company that took dummies like me who didn't have any money but a lot of knowledge. They would back us, but when I say back us, they would own us, factor our receivables, loan
Mm,
us money at a pretty good interest rate. And then
okay,
they like to
that's
build us up and then sell us to somebody else. That's kind of their model.
okay. And that's
And it,
medical factoring, right? Is what that
yeah,
is? Okay.
medical factoring and loaning money at the same time. They did about $1 billion for a year in just specific radiology transactions around the country. And
So, and they build you up and then they sell you to
they
someone
help
else.
us build up, and then
Mhm.
they got merged with somebody else, help us exit. So, and I knew all those guys over the years, so good guys to work with. But it was, they owned you. You
Mhm.
had to be realistic about the facts that they factored the receivables.
Mhm.
And I pledged everything I had in my house, my cars, and what little bit of money I had left over to them. And again, in one day, um, they went bankrupt because the FBI went into them and found out they were double selling paper. So they would do a deal with me,
Mhm.
sell it to another bank or another investment group, and then turn around and sell
Mhm.
the paper to somebody else.
Wow, that's wild.
So we got
It's yeah.
smashed again.
I'm in the mortgage note space, as I mentioned to you before, and unfortunately, probably on a lesser scale, but we have people in this space that do the same thing, and it's usually called joker brokers, where they'll take either they may not even own the note yet, but sell the same note to multiple buyers. So you've got to really do your due diligence on who you're buying from, first of all, and then secondly on the asset itself, to make sure you're buying what you think you are. So okay,
Yeah.
so
So we recovered from that and came up with a business model that was unique and different, and started working with that. Sort of really saved the day. And over the next 15 years or so, we built 28 medical imaging centers across the state of Texas. We got into pain management and built
okay,
11 surgery centers with pain management doctors. And unlike the START legislation, it didn't affect surgery centers, so you could have physician owners in surgery centers. So we had
okay,
about 53 pain doctors, uh, and we're the place you hurt your back. Rather than
Mhm.
stick a needle in it in his office, he comes to the surgery center and we put you to sleep, let it be a little more comfortable. And he sticks the
Okay,
needle in the back of your neck, and built that business up. Got into the toxicology business a little bit and built 2 toxicology labs. Um, just having fun growing the company.
so at this point, what's your main driver? You said having fun growing the company. Is it obviously you want to make money? Is it financial? Is it what's kind of your what's drawing you to the next level at this point?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple things for me. There's a cute story about there's a recording of me in high school, and if I hadn't heard it myself, I wouldn't believe it. But they're asking questions at my church about what are you going to do after you graduate high school, and there's this little tiny voice that says, "I'm going to change the destiny of a family," and that really became my mantra with the company. Even what I do now is trying to really change the destiny of my family. It was also about my employees. At our height, we probably had 1,000 employees. One of my greatest claims to fame and things I love is that 13 of my employees were made millionaires because of this.
Wow,
And
that's
so, we
fantastic.
let them have ownership in the company as we grew it. And so I was motivated by that. And,
Hmm.
and anyone's lying if they say they're not motivated by money too. Of course, I was
Sure,
motivated by money,
absolutely.
but all
But I
those
mean, but you can be motivated by money and actually do good at the same time. Is that
that was exactly
believe
my
it or not, entrepreneurship and businesses can be a force for good. Is that fair to say?
that is absolutely the truth. We always supported charities. We always did charity things with the team. We
Hmm.
were big into that. I loved the team we had. It was really kind of probably my most favorite time in business was during those years.
Okay. And then I know we don't have, unlimited time here, but mention some of the highlights as far as the exits that you mentioned to me before we hit record.
Sure, we exited the labs first at around 2015. We exited the surgery centers over time because we sold those one at a time to various hospital groups for the most part. But our big exit, and again, we made a lot of money. I mean, I share these numbers, not bragging, but just factual.
Hmm.
But before we sold it, if my distributions were probably anywhere from $700,000 to $800,000 a month from my companies, and so when we sold, it was a nice deal, and we sold to a strategic partner in 2017 that was just getting started, but they had a lot of money and wrote us a $94 million check.
Wow. So,
They're now publicly traded. They're now the second largest in the world. I
okay,
sit on the
just
board.
700,000 to $800,000 per month to you personally.
Yeah.
And that went on for a few years, you said?
Yeah, I mean, it increased over time, but the money started flowing in 2004. And I would say 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 were really, really, really nice years for us.
I mean, and I don't mean to pry to get personal, too personal. It just, those numbers are astronomical. And I know it's all relative, right? It's nothing compared to Elon Musk, right? Or, things like, but, and then the exit as well, which you just kind of glossed over, of 94 million, but, um, that's awesome. So, and then you got into, I think you mentioned you got into Orange Theory and some other, uh, the fitness world as
Yeah,
well.
and I probably should throw in the personal story, if you don't mind, that
Yeah,
kind of led me
absolutely.
to the exit. So in 2011, November exactly, November 28th, I think, my wife Marcia and I were flying back from Chicago, and she said, "Hey, I've got a stomach ache. Can we stop at the local urgent care center and see what's going on?" And we did. And 24 hours later, we had a confirmed diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. No signs, no symptoms. It came out of nowhere. And I turned the company over to my team and said, "I'll see you guys in a little bit," because I had seen the images personally. I knew that's what I do for a living, and I
Sure.
had never seen someone that, you know,
Wow.
that sick.
That
And
advanced. Yeah.
we went all over the world looking for answers, but we ended up at MD Anderson in Houston. And uh, on May 20th of 2012, she was dismissed from the practice. And we're driving back from Houston. I get a big knife-like pain in my back, and I think I've got a kidney stone. And I take her home, put her to bed, go to the emergency room, and I don't have a kidney stone. I've got a tumor also. And I've got renal cell carcinoma. Made the decision to not do chemo or radiation, just said, cut me open, take it out. Anything else? I still have to get a little emotional about the story. And
Mhm.
they took my right kidney, tumor, a little bit of other stuff, sewed me up, and I walked out of the hospital in 19 hours in against their orders, and went home to be with her, and she made it 6 more days. And so I was
Wow.
now raising an 11-year-old child and a 14-year-old child, and my entire focus changed. And I went back to work soon thereafter, and it became an issue of setting up the company to either work without me ever again being there
Hmm.
or to exit. And so that's really what drove us toward the exits.
I see. Was the health situations of
Well, the change in focus and what really became
right.
important to me.
Sure. Well, speak to
And
that briefly if you would, because you were making tons of money, right? But what did the money mean to you versus the personal situation?
yeah, well, I could have kept making money. I knew a couple of things were happening. One, I knew we needed to exit the company. I just knew it was time. I could see the industry changing. I could see how I was changing
Mm,
about things. And really, it took us 3 years to get the exit put together, and we had to restructure the company a little bit to make it more attractive to potential buyers.
mhm,
And so it was a combination of things.
mhm,
But I will tell you that that kind of life-changing experience just changes your focus. Doesn't mean I
mhm.
don't want to make money. Doesn't mean
Sure.
I'm not an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
but I was ready to bank a bunch of more money so that my kids never had to worry again. My
Mhm.
grandkids don't have to worry again. And that was my primary motivation was, okay, let's bank some money now for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to just, this is really kind of the hits to the crux of my show, frankly, is um I love making money. I mean, it's I don't have any issues with that at all. I think it's great, but it doesn't
No,
solve all of your problems either, right? I mean, you still had real world family and medical problems that we I don't want to just gloss over, but they're you know they were very real. And no matter how much money you have in the bank, it's you've still got to, everyone has these problems and struggles. And that's extremely dramatic. And there's not, I mean, and just there's nothing I can say to you know to express enough, I guess, condolence for you at that time. I can't imagine what you went through at that time, honestly. But um,
I
so
will
what
say
would you
this,
go?
I
Yeah,
will
go ahead.
say this, that life is going to happen and all these things
Hmm.
happen. I will tell you, having money makes it easier.
Okay.
Freedom.
Yeah.
It allowed for us to have better transportation to Houston. It allowed for us to stay in nice hotels when we were there.
Sure.
Allowed me to take care of my children and have a nanny and those kind of things. So,
Hmm.
people that are rich, you can have some problems too.
Right.
Money does help make it a little easier. I've learned that.
No, I think I completely agree with that. And I think on the, one side of, I think people use that, money can't buy happiness as an excuse to not work hard and excuse to not pursue financial freedom. And it obviously gives you options, right? It gives you control over a lot more than you would have had control of. And it can alleviate some other stresses and then you can focus on what's really important. So yeah, that's really good. So, and then kind of walk us through up until today, if you would, from the entrepreneurial standpoint.
Yeah, and so that really gets into why we started with the Orange Theory Fitness discussion. So I went on Match.com eventually, raising two boys. Couldn't do the bar scene. A guy that has a nice car and a wallet and lives 3 blocks from Jerry Jones can be susceptible to drama. I didn't really want that for my boys. And maybe that's male chauvinistic pig in me, but I just didn't want it. And so had what I said was my first date in 20 years and the last first date for the rest of my life. I met Kathy, about my age. She had 2 grown daughters too. And we connected, dated for about 3 years. And in that process of being in Florida one time on a trip, someone said to me, "Have you ever heard of Orange Theory Fitness?" And I kind of said those famous words, "What the blankety blank is Orange Theory Fitness?" Took the class, liked the class, but fell in love with the trainer because I've said over and over, she bled orange. My entrepreneurial hat goes on, and I bought 3 franchises initially, and then ultimately bought the North Texas territory. And over the next 5 years, we built 33 Orange Theory Fitness gyms. Kathy and I got married. She was great raising my boys. And we sold that company in December of 2019, 3 months before the pandemic, for about 66 million.
Wow. And why the timing of that exit? I mean, obviously you didn't know the pandemic was coming, but why'd you sell at that point?
No, I have a 5-year model now. Once I got through the things, and now I've had like 8 exits. So the 5-year model is, build it, put it in infrastructure, get it going. Don't take your money off the table immediately. Roll it back into your company. And I had literally hired Fifth Third's Bank to take us to market on January of 2019. So we went to market, did the book, as you know, and we had 70 interested parties. We had 39 letters of intent. It was nuts, dude. It was nuts. And so it took us, 6 months to negotiate through all that, which just dropped us into December. No clue. And it was sold to a private equity group who I'm still in touch with today. A partner and I maintain the area rights to Orange Theory Fitness, so we still own the area. And we've sold 8 franchises since we sold the company to other folks. And, next year, November of 2023, my Orange Theory Fitness days are over because my area rights contract expires. And so we've started some other companies. We did a group called Be Balance. It's a female homeopathic hormone weight loss company. As lucky as we were to get out of Orange Theory pre-COVID, we were probably that unlucky to get into a retail company. So I just literally 2 weeks ago brought in a new partner, someone that's more experienced in that space. And we've got 3 stores open. We got during COVID. Now our plan was 18. So now we're back on track.
Okay.
Got involved with a group called Scent Hound. And they do a pet wellness, health and wellness and grooming company. Bought 10 locations in Dallas with the rights for 10 more. So putting together the team for that. For fear to sound like a complete peckerhead, just bought a charter jet company with a jet. So that's kind of fun and learning that business. Brought 15 trailers over from China for a food trailer company with another group. So just kind of having that, loving doing the mentoring, loving doing the chairman, really excited about not having to worry about whether Tom or Sally punches the clock anymore. That's not my job. job is to just mentor and be there for people and guidance. So I'm really enjoying that right now.
Yeah. So just briefly, what does kind of your typical week look like, Monday through Friday, or even just a typical day? What does that look like?
Well, if it's today, I had an 8:30 meeting for a guy pitching me on a deal. I had a 10 to just a few minutes ago board call for a pet toxicology company I'm involved in and on their board. Now I'm doing a podcast with you.
Yeah.
When I finish with you, I've got to tour somebody through a couple of the Be Balance centers.
Okay.
Then my son's in town. I'm gonna take it for sushi tonight. So it's a lot of,
Nice.
when I'm in town, it's a lot of meetings. And then when I'm in Cabo, it's kind of interesting because COVID really created this virtual world. I'll
Mhm.
sit in front of this computer for 5 or 6 or 7 hours sometimes. My
Mhm.
wife fusses at me, but I will. Just the business from Mexico, started a property management company there with a group, so we're
Hmm.
getting that going.
Where does the property management company operate?
They'll be based out of Cabo,
Okay.
be based out of San Jose del Cabo, and Cabo's house market has just gone crazy.
Hmm.
And we bought a
Okay.
house there 2.5 years ago, and it's doubled in value in 2.5 years.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
so there's a lot of need for property management, and so we're
Mhm.
putting that company together right now. We're trying to figure out the right marketing strategy. We kind of want to be American based, just to kind of catch people's attention.
So, and just to be clear, you don't really have any kind of formal business training. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, mine is all the school of hard knocks. I mean, I went to college, but they don't
Yeah.
teach. We have a funny line in my story in my life where my 12-year-old son one time said, "Dad, you have to stop saying they didn't teach me that at Jones County Junior College." So I used to say that all the time. He said we should turn that into a drinking game. So for fear of going to jail, I might be the only guy that did a tequila shot with his 12-year-old son. When I said, just don't go to, Jones. They didn't teach me that at Jones County Junior College. They really don't teach you this stuff. You learn it through
Okay.
experience, through
Yeah.
resilience of getting knocked
Yeah.
down, getting back up.
Yeah. Well, let's hope the statute of limitations has run out on the tequila shot.
They'd have to approve it, yeah.
Incident. um, so I mean, just wow, just so many. Now, looking back, if you had to, you had to so much adversity. What would you say? Just whether you're thinking about financial adversity or health and loss of loved ones or divorce, what are one or two lessons you've learned from all of that adversity?
Yeah, I think, well, the health one is hard to predict.
Sure.
I do a lot more screening of my body now and CT scans all the time and things like that. But, on the business side, I kind of wish I'd have started earlier. I wish I'd have jumped earlier. I wish
Okay.
I'd understand that it takes risk.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's plenty of sayings that if you don't learn from your successes, you learn from your failures. And I
Sure.
always say, you add to that, if you haven't failed at least 3 times, you're probably not trying hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of
No,
wish I'd have started earlier. I really
no,
do.
that's a good one. So for people out there, do you think everyone should be an entrepreneur? Should they have a side hustle, while they're working a full-time job if they're thinking about starting a business? I know that's kind of hard to give blanket advice to someone you don't even know, but what would you say as far as working a W-2 and starting a business at the same time, or just ripping off the Band-Aid and jumping right in?
Yeah, let me be very clear. There's nothing wrong with building a career and working for
Mm-hmm.
a W-2. There's nothing wrong with that. And I've met
Mm-hmm.
people that achieve financial dreams and security for their family.
Yeah.
There's nothing to do that, but it is hard to go to that next level
Mm-hmm.
with
Yeah.
W-2. It just
Sure.
is. It's just so important for people to understand that not everyone can be an entrepreneur,
Mm-hmm.
but it's okay. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I have tons of people in my life that aren't entrepreneurs that have been successful. I have tons of people in my life that have just gotten by, and was okay. They paid
Sure.
their bills. They have a retirement plan. Good for them.
Yeah.
So
Now, and I'll have we have some rapid fire questions, but before we get to that, what do you put your investor hat on? Not so much your business entrepreneur hat, but what do you look for in investments these days?
yeah, it's interesting. I've kind of slowed down on investments. I have my own private fund, and I've done about 43 different startup investments, more angel investing.
Mm.
Some have worked out. couple have worked out. I got one that's going to maybe be a grand slam. We'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also had some that just bailed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at a point in my life where I'm kind of living on the money my money makes.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of
Yeah,
a nice place to be. It's a really cool place to be. So I'm much more conservative in my
sure.
investment right now. I'm looking more at income producing investments. So real
Mm-hmm.
estate's not a bad one.
Sure.
Uh, I look at other things that are income producing, not doing as many startups anymore, just
Sure.
because I need the money working.
Yeah, you need the immediate cash flow and you don't need the risk as well.
Not as much
Um,
anymore. Yeah.
sure. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. If you're up for it, I'm going to fire off some rapid fire questions here.
Go, baby.
What's one thing that people misunderstand about you?
They think I'm a dumbass redneck.
Actually, speaking of that, just mention your book if you would. Hold
Yeah,
up your
it's
book.
called Redneck Resilience. It's a country boy's journey to prosperity. I've got so many more stories that I didn't tell today about my life journey. I'm probably, well as my Peloton title is, the luckiest redneck in the world.
Nice.
I'm lucky redneck on Peloton. That's me.
I love it. That's awesome. Um, you've next question. We've already talked about this somewhat, but what would you say is one of your biggest failures? Maybe besides failures or regrets, besides not starting sooner. Anything else come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I have personal regrets, I think that are a bit intimate, but
Mm-hmm.
you always regret having divorced it, and you have a 5-year-old child you have to try to see twice a month while you're traveling all over the world. And
Mm-hmm.
so I have a lot of regrets about that. But if I hadn't done that, I would not have met Marcia. And I have tons of regrets about her leaving this world. I question why and how, but
Mm-hmm.
I also recognize that I wouldn't have met Kathy. So it's kind of this transition of your
Yeah.
regret and sadness, but also I keep bouncing back and going, okay, let me take this thing bad. In the case of Marcia, I mean, we created probably 5 or 6 different philanthropic endeavors. We put up a scholarship fund for all her nieces and nephews. And on her 10th anniversary, my sons met with all the nieces and nephews, and we just put together a scholarship fund for the nieces and nephews' children in
Wow.
Marcia's honor. And then we put life insurance on the boys. So when they kick the bucket, the educational fund will be funded again, and maybe their great grandchildren will know who Marcia Beth Fisher was.
Wow. That's phenomenal. So it sounds like you realize you can't take the good without the bad and vice versa. It's nothing operates in a vacuum.
You're going to get the bad. You're going to get the bad a bunch. And I think the difference is that ability to not just get back up, because we're talking about getting knocked down, getting back up. It's getting knocked down, get back up, and then finding a path. And in my case, having some really hard times and go, okay, that path didn't work. Let me try this path.
Sure.
Huge
Absolutely. And maybe you already gave me the answer to this question, but if you could go back and give your 18-year-old self some advice, what would it be?
Some advice. I will say this, that relationships are key and critical and the single biggest factor in your success.
That's really good.
Relationships, whether it be with your employees, whether it be with your customers, whether it be with your vendors. I've had such good relationships. They're serious and sincere relationships with people that wrote me $1 million checks just because they trusted James Webb.
Yeah. So it's not just transactional and based on a contract. Got it. Okay. That's really good. If you could have coffee with any historical figure, who would it be and why? They could still be alive if you choose that.
Oh, there's a lot of fun ones to talk about. But I think really I'm a big fan of Calvin Coolidge
Okay.
and
Yeah.
his discussion about being omnipotent, and I would really love to understand more about what he went through, because he's not ranked as a good president, but he did some
Yeah.
good things. And it
Okay.
might be fun to sit with someone like that and go, okay, you weren't well liked, but you did good. So explain that to me.
Sure. That's really good. Hadn't heard that. Hadn't been given that answer before. Normally I asked if
That Elvis or something, but that's a different.
Normally I ask something about if you were given $10 million tomorrow, what would you do with it? Maybe I should change it to 50 in your case, but I'm joking around. But what would you do with it if you were just handed a huge check tomorrow? What would you do with it?
Yeah, so we have that in place now for our current deals. And so we once we pay our taxes, we've committed 10% of all the money we make goes into, we have a family foundation. So every time we make a check or a penny, 10% goes to family foundation. The rest of it just goes back into the money for the family. I mean, we spend a lot of time and energy on family governance. We actually hired a company to work with us, and we have
Okay.
quarterly meetings as a family. We have a monthly get-together as a family. My children see my balance sheet once a year.
Hmm.
Now they have to tear it up after they see it, but we go through it. They understand it.
Yeah.
Go through the estate plan. They understand it. So I don't know if I do anything like go buy a yacht or anything like that. It's just
Hmm.
put it into the family. So my heritage, my legacy, my children, my grandchildren,
Sure.
have a little more.
Yeah. Curious about that. Is there any resistance or any kind of like disagreements that ever come out of those family quarterly meetings?
You know, I think we've had some discussions and disagreements about certain points.
Hmm.
Um, but what's really been best about it is we have our little committees, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
cute. That we run our family almost like a business. So we have the
Mm-hmm.
financial committee, which I'm teaching and them about our business. We have the
Yeah.
philanthropy committee, which runs our foundation. And then
Mm-hmm.
we have the fun committee, which plans our yearly family
Hmm.
either retreat or vacation or time we all try to get together.
That's pretty cool. I'm glad I asked that one. That's really neat. Yeah, I'm in this. I mentioned to you before. I'm in the Wealth Without Wall Street mastermind, and a lot of the things that these guys talk about are similar to what you're saying, as far as just getting, basing things around the family and planning and legacy, and um, as opposed to, you know, IRAs, which is an individual investment plan. Nothing wrong with an IRA. I'm not saying there is, but nowadays, at least where I am in Maryland, it's everything's kind of me, frankly.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really good that you've established that structure and the forward looking planning element, and it's all based around the family. So personally, I really like that.
Yeah, it's really important to me to do that. And it's I learned a statistic that caught my attention probably 10 years ago, which was 94% of all wealth is lost by the third generation. And
I've heard some.
80%
Yeah,
of
I've
that
heard that.
is caused by family disagreements, not by bad investments.
Hmm.
And when I
Wow.
saw that, I hired a company and said, okay, teach me how to keep my family together.
Hmm.
The number one way to do that is philanthropy.
Hmm. Okay.
Number two
What
is family
company is that?
vacation. Yeah.
What company did you hire? Do you mind mentioning?
They're
You don't.
called Asperia 360. They're out of Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay. That's
And
I'm in Baltimore County, so
yeah, I'll send you their website. They're a good bunch of
okay.
guys. They specialize in this, and really
Yeah.
we started out with basic stuff in the beginning. We're on our 6th or 7th year with them now.
Okay.
We're just
Nice.
dropped back to they just organize our family meetings. They make sure we all get on the phone once a quarter, have our discussion about our committees. So it's new and interesting and trying to teach my generation. And I think
Yeah.
the biggest challenge you have for me and for you and others is start let go, because I like to be
Yeah.
in charge. And so I'm
Sure.
trying to learn how to let go, let them make decisions.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, timing it for when they're actually ready is another, at least for
Exactly.
me, a challenging thing. Um, so,
Yep.
um, what is a book besides your own? What's another book you'd recommend for my audience who's entrepreneurs and real estate investors?
I don't, it's kind of funny. I'm not a huge reader. I
Okay.
wasn't someone that read maybe my favorite book is The 1 Minute Manager. And,
Okay. Yeah.
and that taught me so much about management skills as a young entrepreneur. Don't really have one to recommend. There's a book out there for families called Buy the Milk First, which really
Okay.
teaches the basics of family financial management. So
Okay.
as you
That's
start
good.
accumulating money, and that applies to whether you're building a retirement plan or whether you're trying to accumulate wealth. It's a decent little book.
Okay. No, that's good. Those are two good recommendations, actually. Um, what's one question that you wish I had asked that I haven't asked? Anything you want to cover?
No, no, listen, this has been a fun one. I've done a few of these podcasts, and this is
Yeah,
always fun to meet someone like you who's a good guy and a cool guy and asks the right questions. So, no, I'm extremely excited about where this is going.
I appreciate that. And I know you didn't come on to really plug anything. Hopefully our listeners will go out and buy your book. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to read it.
Net resilience. There you go.
Redneck Resilience. So they can find that Amazon, pretty much anywhere else.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. It's there.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to plug or mention how our listeners can reach out to you?
They want to find me, they can go to my website, jamesharoldwebb.com.
Yep.
Easy
I'm on
one.
there.
I love mentoring. I'm kind of tired of getting pitched. And so
But how do you do you have kind of a mentoring structure, or how does that work?
no, it's just been kind of fun. People will reach out, we'll connect usually through Zoom. And
Mhm.
if they're local, I'm helping down in Fort Worth. I literally don't even know him, but he's got a business opportunity. And so we met
Okay.
for breakfast, and now we're going to meet again in January.
That's
I just
great.
enjoy doing it.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's just something where you're giving back.
Yeah.
Um, Fantastic. All right. Well, James Webb, thank you so much for joining us. This has been fantastic. I really do appreciate you taking the time. Maybe you have a little more time than you had a few years ago, during the day, but you didn't have to take this hour with us. So I do appreciate you sharing your story and the ups and downs and personal as well as business with our audience. So thank you so much for joining us.
True pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And to our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your most valuable resource with us, and that is your time. Thanks, everyone. Take care.